All right, welcome everyone to the February Central Indiana ASSP meeting. We're happy to have Dave West here, one of our board members, and also on the NASA Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the history, the mission, and the impact. So we're really excited to get into that main topic for today. But before we do so, I just had a couple of announcements about the chapter activities. So our upcoming meeting, as you know, we partner with Indiana Chamber of Commerce to put on the best safety conference in the world, which is the Indiana Safety Conference and Expo, March 1st through the 3rd. So if you haven't registered for that, please go ahead and do so. This is a virtual event, so you can attend from almost anywhere in the world wearing whatever you want. So, but still have that educational information come to you. So please go visit the website and register for that event. In April, we're happy to have the IU students come and present on their student research projects. I actually think we're also going to get the Indiana State University section and the Purdue student section. So we're going to have our students come in and present on some research projects and some things that are going in their chapter. In May, on May 14th, we have the safety doctor talking about the leadership skills, 18 lessons learned on the link. So that will be a great webinar as well. So at any time, you can go onto our Central Indiana website and take a look at what activities we have going on and register for those events. Again, the 2021 conference has more than 70 educational sessions available. And one interesting thing is if you register for this event, you'll be able to have access to those recordings for some time after the actual event. So during most conferences, you're only able to attend, one session during a time, but you can go back and review a lot of those sessions. So reminder to put yourself on mute if you can. All right. And we would like to have you save the date, and actually registration is now open. If you're interested in our 9th annual Future Safety Leaders Charity Golf Outing. So this has been going on for 9 years, and all the proceeds go to students pursuing a health and safety degree. So I believe over the 9 years, we've been able to reward over $20,000 in scholarships to future safety professionals. So we strongly urge you to go and to register for that event, whether it's a single golfer, a foursome, a whole sponsor, or other sponsorships available to help support our future safety professionals. And that is July 30th of this year. And we're happy to award last year's recipients of the scholarship. So as you can see there, we have 2 from Indiana State for a total of $4,000 and 2 from Indiana University for a total of $3,000. So we're able to up our to over $27,000 over the 9 years. So we're more than happy to do that for these future safety professionals, and happy to have your support. Also, it is that time of the year for nominations and elections. We know not everyone's able to participate in a high level in the chapter, but if you're interested in getting more involved, we do have open positions for a secretary, a treasurer, and a vice president. Those nominations will end February 28th. So if you're interested in more information, reach out to us, our chapter email, or send myself, Jeff Fox, chapter president, an email. More than happy to talk through that. If you're not interested in an officer role, we have many different types of committees where it's not as time consuming, but you can definitely be involved. So it's definitely a rewarding experience to volunteer for such a powerful organization such as ASSP. Also, a perk of being a member and attending these virtual events is that as we partner with BCSP and Dave West, actually, which is our presenter today, BCSP is able to provide discounted exam application fees. So these are promo codes. If you're interested in pursuing an application for any of the BCSP certifications, you can get those. So please send an email to David West. It's david.west@bcsp.org, and we'll be happy to connect you with a promo code and more information. Also, we are accepting sponsors for our monthly chapter meetings. We can do sponsors for our webinars. but specifically this is really handy when we have our face-to-face meetings. It seems like forever since we've had a face-to-face meeting, but we're happy to have sponsors come in, talk to the group, provide lunch, however they want to do it. So if that's something your company is interested in, please reach out to us. And hopefully maybe once we get our face-to-face meetings up again, we can have some sponsors come in and talk to our group. If you're looking for a job or have a job opening that you would like to post, we keep our job openings on our website up to date almost on a weekly basis. So please use that as a valuable resource to get out to all the 500 health and safety professionals we have in our chapter. And one new initiative that you may have not heard about, but we have an initiative to reach the high school students. So just like our college scholarships for future safety professionals, we want to get into the younger individuals and let them know what safety is and provide them an avenue to get a scholarship if they're pursuing a health and safety related degree of some kind. So if you have a local high school which you'd like us to get in contact, maybe you have a high school student that you know of, or you work in a high school, please reach out to us. These are due March 31st, and we have free money to give away to high school students. So please help us do so and get the word out. We have many sub-functions of our chapter. Women in Safety Excellence is one of those. So this is comprised of mainly of women that come together as a group and have different initiatives and networking meetings and opportunities. So if you're interested in that, please go onto our website. You can see the WISE chapter there and the contact information and the activities that they're performing. So that's all the announcements I have, but please stay in contact with us, especially since we're not meeting and networking in person quite yet. We are all over LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Kelsey's got that quite under control. So, but if you're interested in taking a look at that, the keyword for most of those is CI-ASSP. So with that, I'm going to transition over to our program chair, Kevin Bestwick, to introduce our speaker.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Dave here, who's going to be our presenter for the day. But before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know we do offer CEUs for attending these sessions. And if you're interested in receiving CEU credit, what you need to do is you need to email the email address you see on this slide. So it's ASSPCEU@gmail.com, and then you'll receive your certificate once you return and post a meeting questionnaire. So you'll be asked, I think it's 10 questions. There's 3 of them that are technical questions about the meeting, but you'll need to complete that and submit it, and then you'll receive your credit. Thanks to Safety Resources and Christie's group for making that happen. So Dave, I want to introduce him, and I don't want to really spend a lot of time. I am excited about the presentation. I kind of looked through Dave's presentation. I think it's going to be a lot of good information and interesting to listen to. But I'm just going to say a few things about Dave. And Dave, I may ask you to kind of elaborate a little bit if you don't mind. But Dave West is our speaker. Dave has a bachelor in nuclear energy and from University of Cincinnati. He's got a lot of alphabet soup behind his name. He's a CSP, an ASP, CHMM, and he's also a professional engineer, PE. His current position is with the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, BCSP. He's the examinations director. So he kind of oversees all things with the examinations and involved with those certifications. Dave, do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on your role there real quick?
Sure, Kevin. Thanks. Yeah, at BCSP, like Kevin said, I am responsible for all the activities that at BCSP that involve the development and maintenance of certification exams. We have 8 certification programs. I think on Jeff's screen, it showed all the logos of the 8 different certifications that BCSP offers. And it's a it's a full-time job for a department of 5 people at BCSP to keep all those exams going. One thing I will clarify, some people don't realize this, but our staff members at BCSP don't write the exams. We rely on panels of subject matter experts that we recruit and gather. Used to be in person, now it's virtually, but we gather from all over the country, diverse geographic regions and backgrounds and number of years they've held the certifications. But those are the folks, the people who are actively involved in the field every day are who we make use of their expertise to develop the examination questions or items, as we call them, and several other things that panels of experts do, like determining the passing scores and doing a job and task analysis to see what kinds of things need to be measured on the exam in the first place. So that's what we do at BCSP. Now, I guess I'll get into more of the other things when I start the presentation. So thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I figured you'd be better to expand on what you do than me, for sure. So speaking of subject matter expert, I know that you have served as a subject matter expert for 28 years, over 28 years for the Science Applications International Corporation. And with that, you've been involved with a lot of different things with the government, from the U.S. Army, getting involved with aircraft, helicopters, rocket launching systems, a lot of really cool stuff, as well as their space program, which I think is what you're going to talk about today, right? So would you like to kind of expand on that, your experience there a little bit?
Sure. Well, actually, yeah, with SAIC, fairly early in my career, I did some pretty interesting work with NASA and the space program. One of the first projects I worked on at SAIC was actually, our customer was the astronaut office, the NASA astronaut office, and it was a risk-benefit analysis of what's called the range safety system on the space shuttle. That is a system that's, a lot of people may not be aware was on the space shuttle at the time, but it was a system that if there was any kind of malfunction with the guidance or trajectory of the space shuttle.
Hey, Matt.
Hello?
Oh, I think somebody just, yeah, there you go.
Somebody went off
They
mute.
just,
Yeah,
they just
okay,
muted
anyway.
themselves. It's okay.
Yeah, no, the range safety system on the space shuttle was actually there so that, and it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about, but if an errant space shuttle was heading towards a city like Orlando, it would be better to essentially activate the range safety system, which another name for it is the flight termination system, and it would essentially sacrifice. It did, or it was there to a difficult decision to possibly sacrifice a few astronauts, or up to 7 astronauts, rather than risk a really catastrophic situation where the space shuttle might crash into a populated area. So that was one of the first things I did at SAIC. Later, I worked up in Cleveland at what at the time was called the Lewis Research Center. It's now called the Glenn Research Center. But I worked on the actually, when what's now the International Space Station, when it was first being designed, it was originally called the Space Station Freedom Program. So I was on a team that did system safety for the space station when it was called Freedom. Cleveland was responsible for the electric power system. So I got to work on the solar array panels and the batteries and the radiator, the electric power system radiator that rejected waste heat into space. Really kind of neat stuff. I also worked on some space shuttle microgravity experiments as a safety lead for a couple of those. So that gave me a really good, strong background in NASA safety work. So, and I think that was helpful in getting my appointment to the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, which is what I'm going to talk about today.
Yeah. That's really neat stuff. Well, That's great. We're glad to have you here. Dave's topic is branding safety, a journey into the future of safety excellence. So
Actually, that's not correct. uh, I don't know where that title came from, but that's
well, what we'll do is we'll just, pretend like that, it sounds good, right?
yeah, I should have just kept my mouth shut, right?
Yeah. Hey, that is the topic. So we'll let you get into your experience and your presentation now, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. I guess I need to share my screen now. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep, we got it.
We can see.
All right, thanks. Again, thanks to Jeff and Kevin for coordinating this opportunity for me today to share some really interesting things with the chapter here. I don't know how often folks in Indiana get to hear about or learn about NASA and space program things. So I thought that might be pretty interesting. The picture that you saw on the last screen that Kevin was showing there on the right hand side, it showed several of us on the panel. There were a few people missing, but that was several of us on the panel that we were touring a facility, I believe, down at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And one thing, since I had talked about my current position with BCSP, one of the questions that people might have is, well, how does this work when you're on a panel? In addition to my my day job with BCSP, the appointment actually consists of is an opportunity to serve as what's called a special government employee, or SGE, with NASA. Fortunately, BCSP supports me in this, and the time that I need to do the NASA duties, they're fine with, and I appreciate that BCSP being supportive of this this experience I have right now. It's an incredible experience. That's what I wanted to share with you about it today. But it is kind of a part-time role with NASA, and I'll get more into how much time we spend and what we do during a typical year and so forth in a minute. But that's basically, yeah, it's an appointment. Like I say, I'll get into that more in a minute here. I'll go ahead. First of all, I need to provide this disclaimer that I'm actually here speaking today, not really as a panel member, not as a representative of NASA or anything like that. So none of the views that I may share, unless I'm quoting a recommendation or something verbatim, none of these views that I'm going to share today are those of NASA or the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. And I'll start calling them the ASSP because that's a lot easier to say. But so I just wanted to give that disclaimer, and sometimes I have to be careful about what's said. There's some legal things. There's some of the information we're privy to sometimes that's called SBU, or sensitive but unclassified. But just wanted to give that disclaimer that these are my own views. I'm speaking as a safety professional today, not an ASSP member. So the three things, like in the title of my presentation, which, by the way, let me go back to that. Here's what it was supposed to be: the NASA's Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, history, mission, and impact. So what I'll start with is about the history. I don't know how many people are old enough to remember this, but way back in 1967, you probably have heard a lot about this catastrophic accident. It was the Apollo Saturn 204, AS-204 capsule. Was really later designated Apollo 1. It wasn't called Apollo 1 at the time, but that designation of Apollo 1 was given to it later. But what happened, there was a test, a launch pad test being conducted. It was called the Plugs Out Integrated Test. And what it was supposed to be a very realistic simulation of the actual countdown. And the command module atop the rocket on the launch pad was actually being disconnected from the the launch pad's electrical system, and it was operating under its own power. And this, believe it or not, was actually classified as a non-hazardous test because the rocket itself was unfueled. So in that regard, it was not, you know, it was not like an actual launch day. But other than that, it was very realistic. They wanted to make it realistic at the time. They actually sealed the astronauts climbed into their seats in the couch in the capsule, were strapped in, the hatch was sealed, and they were actually using it was a high pressure, or not high pressure, but pressurized pure oxygen environment inside the cabin. And that was, by the way, what had been done all through the predecessor programs, the manned spaceflight programs, the Mercury and Gemini programs for launch pad ground tests. They did this several times with Mercury and Gemini, and there was never any incident. Well, they were doing this on January 27th of 1967, and there was a spark that was, they think it was likely, it was never confirmed through any investigation, but they think it was probably some faulty electrical wiring that started this fire. And in this pure oxygen environment, that didn't take long to become an inferno inside the cabin. I think it was burned at over 1,000 degrees. And it took, because the way the capsule was designed at the time, it took the pad workers over 5 minutes to open the hatch. The astronauts inside the cabin were actually, they could see them trying to reach for the bolts to unfasten it from the inside. But the problem was that the hatch opened inward, and the fire that started created, you know, a lot of heat and pressure. So it forced the hatch against it where it was seated. And like I say, it opened inward. So there was absolutely no way that anybody could have opened that, even if they could have, you know, unfastened the bolts in time. And I think the Roger Chaffee, who was the rookie astronaut, the other two, Gus Grissom and Ed White, had some experience in space on the previous programs, but Roger Chaffee was the rookie. He was very fit athletically, and even in tests that he had done opening the hatch prior to this day, it was very difficult. It took him 2 full minutes. And I think the bare minimum that they designed it for was like 1.5 minutes to open that hatch from the inside. And of course, they were overcome really by toxic gases, which is what the autopsy showed. But very bad situation. I want to point something out too about the photo on the lower right here. I remember reading, we had one of those, you know, coffee table books when I was a kid. We had a coffee table book about the Apollo program and landing on the moon and so forth. But they talked about this accident and actually showed this picture. If you look at that picture, lower right corner, you see what looks like a paper there in the foreground. If you were able to zoom in on that picture, you'd actually see that there's binder rings on that paper, and it's, you know, really quite miraculous that that document did not burn up with everything else in the cockpit there, the cabin, but it's actually the flight plan that survived somehow the fire, and it's shown there in the foreground. So, oh, by the way, yeah, like I said, it took over 5 minutes for the pad workers to open that hatch once they realized there was a fire going on, and you know, the outside of the cabin was scorched, or the outside of the capsule was scorched and so forth. You can see that in some subsequent pictures. And there were 27 launch pad workers who all had to be treated for smoke inhalation. That's how bad this fire was. Now, in the aftermath of this fire, this is part of the history of the establishment of the ASSP that I'm on now. But I wanted to point out some other things. Like I said in the previous slide, there was no actual ignition source or, you know, proximate cause of that fire ever identified. They knew that some contributing factors were that high pressure oxygen in the capsule. They kind of realized afterwards that there were some deficiencies in the design and manufacture and installation and quality control of the hardware. and management and testing failures. I mean, these were the kinds of things that you could see clearly in hindsight. And that's, all documented in the investigation report. There were some recommendations made in the investigation report. The spacecraft was actually redesigned. There was a much quicker way of getting out. I think after the redesign, it took like less than 15 seconds to open the hatch after the redesign. They had some improved quality control measures and procedures, and new procedures for testing and emergencies like this. And there's what I call here, these are my words, several giant leaps for safety. And I have a quote here from, actually a few quotes, if you look at those text boxes on the right, that the amount, this is from he's a guy who's the Apollo curator at the National Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian, but he had said the amount of wiring and things that could go wrong inside Apollo were hundreds of times greater than those earlier spacecraft in the Mercury and Gemini programs. Remember I said that with Mercury and Gemini, they had also used the pure oxygen environment for ground tests. But with the Apollo spacecraft, it was so much more complex and lots of things that could go wrong. The faulty wiring being one of those, of course. There was a NASA Guidance, Navigation, and Control, or GNC systems officer, a guy by the name of Jerry Griffin, who pointed out something I thought was worth sharing here, that it was a tragic event. We lost 3 really good friends, pictured here in the lower right, but it may have saved the Apollo program. And if we'd had something like this happen on the way to the moon, it probably would have ended. And by the way, speaking of things like this happening on the way to the moon, anybody who's seen the movie Apollo 13, saw that there was a near tragic accident with Apollo 13. And by that time, we'd already had 2 successful moon landings before Apollo 13. So fortunately, there was enough momentum, I think, with the Apollo program by the time Apollo 13 happened, that there were a few subsequent moon landings after Apollo 13. And by the way, speaking of Apollo 13, I think at the beginning of the movie Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks, I think they had a scene that talked about this Apollo 1 fire. So anyway, some other giant leaps, as I called them, for safety. They did go back and revisit every single design and procedure to look at the contributions to the fire, and Apollo became a much more safe and reliable spacecraft than it would have been otherwise. That's according to Alan Needell. And Apollo 1, this accident marked the last time that pure oxygen environment was used in a capsule on the ground. I think it was still a very highly enriched or high concentration oxygen environment that was used once the capsules were up in space. But of course, fire behaves a lot differently in space with weightlessness. You don't have convection and so forth. So I think they felt it was a lot less risky in terms of fire once in space. But the other thing that's pertinent to my presentation here today is that very same year there was an act of Congress. It started in 1967, the same year as the fire, but the formation or the establishment of the panel, the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel, was made official in 1968. So, and please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to interrupt me. There will be time at the end, hopefully, for questions. But if you've got anything during the presentation, don't hesitate to speak up. Or I can't. I'm looking at 2 full screen.
No questions so far, Dave. I'll let you know if there are any questions coming.
Okay, yeah, thanks. If anybody wants to use the raise hand feature, I'd appreciate some help in seeing that, because I'm using both screens right now.
Yep, we'll monitor it.
Okay, thanks. Here's some excerpts, if you will, and actually a picture of the act that formed the ASAP, originally introduced into Congress in August of 1967. Like I say, it wasn't official till the NASA, or the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Act of '68. which you can see it there. But here's the actual section that established the ASAP. And I've underlined a couple of things here. First of all, it says very clearly in the act, in the law, that there's a maximum of 9 members. And they're appointed by the administrator, and it's terms of 6 years each. I have just begun my 4th year, so I'm just past the halfway point, my halfway point of my term on the panel. And by the way, at the bottom there, it does point out that 1 member is designated by the panel as its chair. But as far as the terms of 6 years each, I'll also point out, you notice it doesn't say no more than 1 term, and I've been serving now. In fact, I replaced somebody on the panel who was on it for 12 years, so I guess he had back-to-back 6-year terms. We just had a guy rotate off the panel who had been there 14 years. He was asked to stay on a little bit longer, I think because of his expertise. So he had kind of a shortened term after his 2 6-year terms. But I guess it's probably not a bad place for me to say a few things about the other members of the panel, just to give you an idea. I have, since my time on the panel began, I think there have been 4 former astronauts who have been on the panel. Currently, I'm still serving with 2 former astronauts. One of them is actually a retired 3-star general of the Air Force, too. She's on the panel now. There is one gentleman on the panel who was formerly the chief health and medical officer of NASA. He's a medical doctor, a surgeon. He's on the panel now. He's interestingly, his day job now, after having retired from NASA, his day job is working for the Virginia Department of Health. So he is very swamped and consumed with being on the front lines of the fight against the pandemic and the coronavirus. But we just also had a guy rotate off the panel who was a rear admiral in the Navy. We've had a lot of the people on the panel are PhDs. I'm one of the few that's not, or a retired general or a medical doctor, things like that. So just to give you a kind of an idea of the caliber of the other people that are on the panel, it's kind of humbling at times. But they tell me I have a role to play too, so I try to live up to that. So a little bit about the mission. I told you what led to the formation and the establishment of the panel, but here's a few things about the mission of the panel. First of all, the public law that created it, if you'd looked at more of the and maybe this was even in that little excerpt I showed on the previous slide, but the panel is supposed to review safety studies and operations plans. And remember, this language is over 50 years old from the original public law, but to review safety studies and operations plans and make reports thereon, and advise the administrator. That's a very clear direction from the public law, but advise the administrator with respect to hazards of proposed or existing facilities and proposed operations. That's a big part of what we do, which I'll get into in a minute, is looking at current programs and operations. And the adequacy of proposed or existing safety standards. And also there's kind of other duties as assigned, but perform such other duties as the administrator may request. And by the way, just last year, we had one of those special taskings from the administrator, Jim Bridenstine, who recently, with the change of presidential administrations, he stepped down. I think NASA is awaiting the appointment and confirmation of a new administrator. But Jim Bridenstine, the administrator until a few weeks ago, had asked us last year to look at NASA's aviation programs. So I actually got to be part of the sub panel, if you will, or work task force, work group, whatever you want to call it. That was only 3 panelists who did some special looking into various facilities at NASA that have a lot of aviation assets and the programs that they run and things that are intended to keep the aviation program safe. So we looked at that and reported back to the administrator on those. That's just an example of one of those other such duties. The panel operates in accordance with what's called the FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act. I won't say too much about that, but it does place special emphasis on the requirements for open meetings and the charter. And by the way, our charter, as I said in the second to last bullet there, meets that particular paragraph of the act. And public involvement, getting expertise from subject matter experts out of the public, not NASA staff, and reporting. It's got requirements there for the annual reports and so forth. And I'll say a little bit more about that here in a minute. Some additional duties and provisions. These are from the charter that we advise the administrator with respect to management and culture related to safety. That wasn't actually in the original public law, but it was added into the charter, and that's something we take real seriously is safety culture. There's actually, believe it or not, there is a person at NASA on NASA staff whose full-time job it is. She's the head of NASA's safety culture. I think that's kind of interesting. We are, according to our charter, to deliberate and report findings, recommendations to the administrator, and anything that's time critical that we uncover or know about, we're supposed to report those immediately. And by the way, speaking of reports, I've got the images from the cover of the last 4 annual reports that we produced. The most recent one from 2020 is the one at the bottom there. And we do have to submit those annual reports. They go to, there's actually 3 cover letters. One is to the administrator, and one is to the Speaker of the House, and one is to the Vice President, who serves as, of course, the President of the Senate. So those are the 3 cover letters for distribution of these annual reports. And those started, as I mentioned here, after the Shuttle Columbia accident. If anybody remembers that, I believe that was 2003. A lot of people know about Challenger, and then there was also the Columbia, which was destroyed with a catastrophic accident. We hold 4 panel meetings every year, quarterly meetings. As a matter of fact, next week is the first quarterly meeting of 2021. It's going to be done virtually. When I first was on my first 2 years on the panel, 2018 and 2019, and actually the first quarterly meeting of 2020 before the pandemic really caused all the shutdowns and lockdowns. Our meetings were conducted at, well, let's see, do I have this? I might have this on a future slide, but yeah, I think I do. I'll wait till I get to that slide. But we hold quarterly meetings that are of the full panel. We have some special full panel meetings once in a while. As a matter of fact, we just had one this week. It was a 2-hour meeting where we received a briefing about some specific things that we brought up in the annual report, and they wanted to share those things with us and brief us on those. But we also have some additional meetings. We call them insight meetings a lot of times. Sometimes they're not mandatory for all the panel members. Sometimes we just get a few people that are available, or people whose expertise falls in that particular area. And it actually provides in the charter that every 2 years the charter has to be renewed. Otherwise, the panel, if it's not renewed, the panel could be shut down and terminated. So we are renewed every 2 years. And there's always the provision also, the administrator may choose to not even have the panel anymore. It could be terminated earlier. Fortunately, that hasn't happened in 54 years. But let's see, next, let's see. Here's some additional requirements that apply to membership and our meetings. They have to be balanced in terms of points of view. We don't want to have any particular point of view, like people with expertise from a aerospace hardware manufacturer dominate our meetings or anything like that. As I mentioned, I think in my introduction there, I said we are all considered special government employees, or SGEs, and we have to comply with ethics laws and so forth. As a matter of fact, just this week we had a mandatory annual ethics training just this week from an attorney from the NASA Office of the General Counsel. We have to provide 15 days advance notice in the Federal Register for our public meetings. Our meetings have to be open to the public. Now let me explain this a little bit. We have portions of our quarterly meetings that it's usually like a 1 to 1.5 hour public meeting where we present. It's audio only, just a verbal, verbally presented reports or summaries of our findings, recommendations, and things that we discussed during the week of the quarterly meeting. And we have to have the minutes of these meetings available to the public, and again, except for those closed portions. And by closed portions, I'm talking about a lot of times that well, in fact, just about every quarterly meeting we have, there are executive sessions. Like we'll have an executive session with the administrator, and that's closed to the public. That's so he can openly share things that he wants us to be aware of, without worrying about whether they're sensitive but unclassified, the SBU kinds of things. So there are provisions for parts of our meetings that can be closed. Let's see. Next, as I said, we have these 4 quarterly meetings, and this is generally the sequence of those meetings. Our first quarterly meeting, and again, this was before COVID. Ever since our second quarterly meeting last year, they've all been held virtually because of the pandemic. But before COVID, this is our first quarterly meeting was usually at KSC in Florida at Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center. It's a nice place to go down there in wintertime. Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, that's Huntsville. NASA headquarters, Washington, D.C., and then in Houston at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Here's what our quarterly meetings typically consist of: is like 2 full days of open sessions, or many of the open sessions with key NASA leadership, and like the NASA chief engineer, the chief health and medical officer we speak to often, program managers, knowledgeable, like the associate administrator. We speak with him just about every meeting. And sometimes it's just knowledgeable people on the programs. Like I said, we occasionally have these closed executive sessions. We meet amongst ourselves. A lot of times those are closed sessions, and a lot of times they'll take advantage and give us tours of key facilities. And I'll point out these pictures on the right side of this slide. The lower picture was I think that was my second meeting back in May of 2018, and that's several of the panel members on top of, or up very high on Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. And that's the one that's being used today by SpaceX for commercial launches. You've probably all heard about SpaceX, but that's the historic launch pad. It was refitted and refurbished and altered and so forth quite a bit for the SpaceX launches. But Pad 39A at KSC was what Apollo 11 was launched from, and then many of the space shuttle launches after that were also from Pad 39A. Then we had, like I say, this public meeting of 1 to 1.5 hours. That's open to the public, announced on the Federal Register and so forth. And if you're not there in person, a lot of times we'll have, at some of the meetings, we'll have people in person who, usually it's people who either work there at that center where we're meeting, or a lot of times it's members of the press who are local, but everybody else is on the phone. All the other people dialing in from the public are on the phone. So I want to tell you a little bit about the impact the ASSP has had, particularly in recent years. That's what I know most about. Here's the way we identify, or the way we add value, particularly. One of the things we're reminded all the time is by the chair is that we're supposed to look for blind spots, things the NASA personnel, the managers, the program managers and leadership may not be aware of. We have an opportunity to dig a little deeper, ask some probing questions, and start some deeper thinking on some of the issues. And if there's key decisions or policies that are in the interests of safety, we can reinforce those. And of course, we provide input to Congress. One of the things about these recommendations, the formal recommendations, I think it's important to understand that those recommendations NASA has to respond to them. They don't necessarily have to concur with them. They can respond in a way that says, well, we don't agree for such and such reasons. So, but they are required to respond to every recommendation we make. I want to talk about some of those formal recommendations. If you look at that link that I show on the website, the ASSP website, there's a page, there's several links or several tabs or pages that you can link to on the, and by the way, if you ever want to look up the website, just go to, just search NASA ASSP panel, and you'll pull up the home page for the panel, and then there's sub pages, if you will, whatever. One of them is on recommendations, and I went down through and counted them. They go back to 2008, and there's over 120 formal recommendations with all the responses and so forth on the website. And I repeated the point there that I made about needing to respond to the recommendations. Here's some of the notable formal recommendations that have been made in recent years. The International Space Station, or ISS, one of the things that a few years ago, it was actually back in our 2011, or I wasn't on at the time, but the 2011 annual report looked into the fact that, or they felt that there was a less aggressive preparation effort for some low probability events. One of them was the possibility of either a catastrophic event on the space station or when it reaches its end of life. And we'd been, the panel has been, actively encouraging NASA to work on plans for a safe deorbit of the space station, which, by the way, is the upper of those three pictures, the one in the middle. Another thing that's been very big, you probably even heard it in the news lately, is MMOD. That stands for micrometeoroids and orbital debris. Space is getting very crowded with all the thousands of satellites that have been launched, and some of them that have disintegrated, and then they just scatter all kinds of debris in orbit. And that's the image you see in the lower left is one of the computer generated images that sort of depicts all the debris that's in orbit, and that gets more and more hazardous, particularly to any human spaceflight operations. If anybody's ever seen the movie Gravity, you'll see the results of, or at least a Hollywood version of the results of a human spaceflight. I think it was a space station being struck by some orbital debris at very high velocities when they're in orbit up there. Another one that we looked at just a year before last, I believe, was the training. And this has actually been recommended. I looked back through the recommendations. There were a couple of them specific to NASA's what's called STEP training. That stands for Safety and Mission Assurance, or SMA. That's the S, Technical Excellence Program. And we learned a lot about this STEP training program, and we recommended that it be required for all technical people in NASA, and NASA has implemented that recommendation. So it's for them to be better aware and knowledgeable in safety type matters. The other thing is the next generation spacesuits. If you see the photo there in the lower right, the spacesuits, the spacesuits that NASA had been using, they call them EMUs or EVA, which stands for extravehicular activity, EVA mobility units. They're 40-year-old technology. They're reaching the end of their useful lives. And recommendation back in 2019 called for a transition to kind of speed things along and get these next generation suits as a formal program and so forth. Actually, the suit on the left side there, I think it was just the year before last, there was a big unveiling of that new design of the spacesuit. So that was something we got involved in. Now, in addition, I'm just about done here. I want to, in addition to the formal recommendations that the panel has made, a lot of times it's just in less formal advice and input, a lot of times documented in our annual reports or communicated during the discussions we have during these quarterly meetings, and of course documented in minutes of the quarterly meetings. But here's some of the notable examples of those. And this is a theme that runs through many of our meetings. Most of the ones I've been involved in the last 3 years now, we look for signs of undue schedule pressures, because if anybody remembers the Challenger, the Space Shuttle Challenger accident from 1986, a big part of the blame for that fell on schedule pressures. There were unsafe decisions made because officials felt they were under pressure to stay with the schedule. So we look for specifically any signs of undue schedule pressures and caution NASA about the possibility of unsafe decisions being made because of the schedule pressures. Another specific one, this second sub bullet here, we advised that a second mobile launch platform be authorized, built, and so forth. And this dates back to 2017, our annual report. I could go into some detail, but I don't really have a whole lot of time. But the thing was, we were afraid that NASA would lose a lot of its expertise because of a big schedule gap that would be in place because of only having at the time one mobile launch platform. So between the first and second launches, because of there only being one platform, there was like a 33-month gap in there. We're talking about the SLS, what's now called Artemis program that's going to take us back to the moon and so forth. There was a big almost 3-year gap between the first and second launches. But with a second launch platform, we've been able to close that gap, and I think that was a big boost for NASA in terms of safety. And another thing there, this last bullet I mentioned, I actually, if you see the text box at the lower right, I got quoted in the press for comments I made at one of our quarterly meetings about the need for continuing with what's called the green run. It is a series of tests for, and you can see a photo of it there on the left, the core stage of the rocket that will be used as part of the Space Launch System, or SLS, in launching the Orion space capsule. This green run involved what's called a hot fire test, a full duration. It's like 8 minutes, just over 8 minutes, I think, of those engines being fired. And there was talk at one point about maybe NASA thought they might be able to get away without doing that. And we pressed, as you can see in my quote here, we pressed for them to continue with that green run. And it was actually in the news a few weeks ago. The final test was what they call the hot fire test. That was on January 16th. And that's a good thing they did that test, because doing that test, one of the 4 engines at the bottom of that big rocket, the Space Launch System, actually shut down before it was supposed to. So they've now decided they need to do a second hot fire test to have a success on that one. So I think that brings me to the end, and I'll ask if there are any questions or any comments anybody'd like to make.
Yeah, Dave, no questions, but there is one comment that there's actually an app called Skyview that shows constellations and all the space debris. That is kind of interesting.
Skyview, okay, interesting, yeah. Okay, well, again, if you have any questions, I think these slides will be made available in PDF form and posted on the website. And I think Jeff said this is being recorded as well. So.
Yes, absolutely. We'll try to post this on our YouTube channel in the next few days when the recording becomes available. And also, if you go to the website, there's a section called Files, and you'll see a lot of the past presentations there.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Dave, for your time.
Hope that was interesting, even for our younger guests there too.
Any questions from the group while we have Dave here? We have a few more minutes.
Good job, Dave.
Thank you. Some people have asked, I've had a lot of people just in the last few years, how do you get on a panel like that? Well, I'll tell you how it happened with me. I mentioned the gentleman and I replaced was actually somebody I used to work with down in Alabama. He was the chief of the safety office for the Aviation and Missile Command at the Redstone Arsenal. And I was on a team of contractors that worked in that office. So I got to know him pretty well. over the years, and we've kept in touch, even though he's retired from the Army now. He was appointed to this panel. He's one of the guys I told you served 12 years. And when it was time for him to rotate off, he recommended me. And it was, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this, it's a very rigorous vetting process for potential new members. I mean, it took months. They looked at my finances to make sure I had no conflict of interest. I interviewed, I think, twice with the panel chair. My resume went to the, at the time it was an acting administrator, because it was during a time when the administrator had retired and there was somebody acting. But you know, my resume went to the acting administrator, and I finally got the appointment letter from the acting administrator. So it's a rigorous process, definitely. Did I get all the questions that had been in the chat? Oh, I see the chat about the sky view.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Is there any classified information that you have to deal with in this panel, or is everything pretty much public knowledge?
It has, there's never been anything designated as classified, but as I said, many things in the briefings we see are marked as SBU, which is kind of a lower level. That stands for sensitive but unclassified. And we have to be careful about that information, and we can't bring it up at public meetings. Obviously, sometimes we have to get clarification from the people presenting. You know, what is it on this slide that you're showing us now in a presentation? What is it about this that's you know, SBU? What causes this to be SBU, so that we know not to bring that up specifically in the public meeting? Sometimes it's competition sensitive things. You know, I don't know if you're aware, but right now there are 3 different contractors working on concepts, designing and building things that will be used as what's called the HLS, the human landing system for the moon. So some of that stuff's competition sensitive, so we can't get into any of that in the public.
Great. Any last questions from anyone?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you what I have today about the ASSP. It was a dream come true, and it's kind of represents a pinnacle of my career right now.
Yeah, thanks for being here and presenting, Dave. It's definitely one of the most interesting topics, I believe, that I've ever been a part of in the 10 years I've been a part of ASSP. So very interesting, and thanks for your time and sharing that. So
You're welcome.
well, that brings us to the top of the hour. So thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully see you at future events.
Yep,
Thanks, Jeff.
I second that as well. Thank you.
Thanks all.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye-bye.
Bye.